Hi, nice to meet you. I am Robin Lee, and I am an influencer in Puerto Rico, and I talk about political education on the platform of TikTok. I have taken this opportunity to educate people on the topic of independence for Puerto Rico. We are using this to open the minds of many people that have thought uh, if we become independent, that many bad things are going to happen, while it's actually the opposite. A lot of positive things could happen for many of us in different territories if we become independent.
Oh, yes, definitely. In Guam, we face a similar sort of thing where people feel that, if we became independent, then everything would fall apart. Or that if you want independence, if you want to decolonize, it means you want to go back in time. And so I think for us, what we do with Independent Guahan is we just try to open up the vision of the world and ourselves as much as possible. There are close to 200 independent countries around the world. And Puerto Rico is larger than Guam, and Guam is only about 210 square miles, less than 200,000 people. There, two of the richest countries in the world are the same size as Guam. Two of the richest countries in the world are the same area as Guam, and then one of them is the same area as Guam, and then Singapore is the same area as Guam, and then Luxembourg in the EU has just a few 10,000 more people than Guam does. At the same time, there are many independent countries which are large but which are not rich. So being big, having lots of people, doesn't necessarily mean you will be more successful.
Now that you mention about the possibilities of independence for Guam and everything that we have in common in the thoughts, can you talk about briefly the history of Guam and how the colonial status is affecting the island up to this day?
Guam, the Chamorro people we are the indigenous people of Guam, and we first settled these islands in the Western Pacific about 4,000 years ago. And in 1521, Ferdinand Magellan and his crew were sailing around the world, and they were sick and they were starving, and they came upon Guam. And the Chamorro people gave Magellan food and water. He killed 7 Chamorros and burned down a village, and then kept sailing to the Philippines, where they killed him there. And so 100 years after that, Spanish colonization begins. It begins with forced Catholicism. It begins sort of with suppression of culture. Prior to colonization, Chamorros, and like other people in the Micronesian region, sailed thousands of miles across the Pacific in traditional canoes, using the stars as the guide. When the Spanish came in, they broke the canoes. They burnt them. They refused to allow the people to leave and to travel. And this, though, comes to an end in 1898, when Guam, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines all are taken by the United States in the Spanish-American War. The United States, this sort of this country which represents itself as the beacon of democracy and freedom, when they come into Guam, they don't bring democracy or freedom. They set up a Navy military government, which controls the lives of the Chamorro people and runs the island like a base. And at that time, the U.S. Navy does whatever it wants. And so they outlaw interracial marriage. They ban whistling at one point, so you can't whistle in public. They ban the Chamorro language, so children are punished for speaking their own native language in schools.
El siguiente, en 1947, en Puerto Rico se aprobó la ley de la mordaza. La ley 53 que prohibía el abogar por la independencia de Puerto Rico, en dar discursos por la independencia de Puerto Rico. La ley establecía que era prohibido toda acción o palabra que fuera conducente a derrocar el gobierno de los Estados Unidos en Puerto Rico.
Se hicieron más restrictivas las leyes de la mordaza.
This period, however, creates a little bit of distance between the Chamorro people and the United States. But this changes dramatically, though, when the United States sort of enters World War II And a few hours after Pearl Harbor is bombed, Guam is bombed by the Japanese. The Japanese occupy the island for 32 months, and more than 1,000 Chamorros die, sort of about 1 in every
Wow.
20. And so the Japanese force the Chamorros into labor, there's forced them into sexual slavery, there's massacres towards the end of their time. And when the Americans return in 1944, Chamorros celebrate this as a liberation from Japanese occupation. But it doesn't really end Guam being a colony. America comes in, they make the Chamorro people citizens, but they also take the majority of the land on the island for their military bases. And even up until today, the people on Guam are US citizens. We are allowed to vote for our governor, but we don't get to vote for president. We don't have a voting representative in the US Congress, and our rights to self-determination are consistently denied by the United States. And so,
Yeah, we're sort of in the same position there. Which also leads me to ask you, when you mentioned that you got US citizenship, but I was watching this interview on YouTube where it talked about the Chamorro, the Constitution that the United States did not get to apply it in the Chamorro people. And they sort of called you something that when I heard it, it wasn't for me, but I got so triggered hearing it. They called you alien racist?